Hey people of the interwebs, this is Arkivian, and I just wanted to talk a little bit more about Star Wars The Last Jedi. But first I want to mention that I don't know all the ins and outs of the Star Wars lore. I mean, I've seen all the major movies, I've seen a bunch of the cartoons, and that's pretty much about it. So I have a good overview, a good idea, but not all the nitty gritty details. I've already done a video about my overall thoughts, but there was a couple of subjects I wanted to go into just a little bit more. And one of those subjects was, how did Star Wars The Last Jedi treat religion? This particular theme of the movie interested me because back when I did my degree, my main focus was on the function of belief and perception in society. So basically that's everything from religion to conspiracy theories to ideologies and how those things function in society. So when I watch a movie that has some kind of commentary on that subject, I tend to focus on it a bit more than most because clearly that's where my bias is. And to be honest, I felt like Star Wars The Last Jedi did a pretty good job of portraying how people utilize religion, which was actually something I wasn't expecting from a Star Wars movie. I thought if they did anything like that, it would have been more like the whole social commentary that happened on the Kisnou planet, where all they basically do is point out that war profiteering and exploitation is bad, but a good way to make everything feel a bit better is to rescue some space horses, where they'll be let out into the wild and probably captured again the following day. And as a bonus, let's leave one of the exploited children we found a ring that could probably get them into quite a lot of trouble should anybody find it. I suppose one of the first things to mention is that in the Star Wars universe, the Force is actually real. There are literally space wizards shooting Force lightning from their fingers, or they're holding laser blasts in mid-air for everyone to see. However, in the movie, powers aren't really the point, at least not for everyone. For the rebels, they don't only just believe in the Force, but they do have some kind of reverence for the concept of the Jedi, and even for the idea that Luke's going to come back and help them at some point. But for the most part, it's something they look to when they're desperate, which happens to be a lot of the time. Effectively, they look towards the Force as a symbol of hope when they need hope, and when the situation's more complex, they look to the Force as some form of balance, whether something's worked for them or against them. They don't seem to care about any kind of rules or practices or rituals, at least from what I noticed in this movie. Though it should be said that these rebels literally have a holy representative among them in the form of General Leia. But even that part of her identity isn't really focused on until later in the film, and even then it largely seems secondary to her role as a military leader. Luke, who's on a nicer version of Dagobah, is an actual Jedi and is still disillusioned by his own religion. Which I thought was great because for Luke it was specifically how people had used the religion that had disillusioned him. And what makes this so interesting is that in the Star Wars universe, the Force is real. So nobody's debating whether or not the overall nature of the supernatural part of it is real or not. Everybody agrees on that part. It's more about how to access their relationship with that Force. And Luke is quite literally a character in the modern Jedi mythos. And so from his perspective, he's been able to separate out the faith from the practices, and then that's where he sees certain levels of hypocrisy throughout its history, and that's what he chooses to focus on. Rey, on the other hand, is arguably a bit more zealous in her belief. I say that because she spends a good chunk of the movie trying to convince a hermit to be their space Jesus, and she doesn't take no for an answer, to the point where she is literally stalking him everywhere they go. She wants the myths to be real, based on whatever idealized view of it she has. And so they put two characters together, Luke, essentially a disillusioned old monk, and Rey, who has an enthusiastic view of the same faith. And they're both put on an island together and are trying to convince each other of their own perspectives of the same thing. And they go from her stalking him to him giving her lessons on why the Jedi actually needs to end and why she should stop pursuing this. And for me, what I liked most about that interaction is that they both fail to convince each other. They both have their views and they both try to push them on each other, and they both are well intentioned. And the more they push each other, the more they just reinforce their own views and their need to convince the other person. And just a bit more on this idea of opposing perspectives, I think they really made that point when they had Luke's flashback and revealed what had actually happened. From Luke's point of view, he was about to do something terrible and then stopped himself and realised he had given in to the dark side a bit. Or at least that's what I think. But at the same time, Kylo Ren saw it, but he had a completely different view. He woke up with somebody above his bed about to kill him, and so he reacted. And from what Luke said, he was already delving into the dark side, and as we know, dark side begins at fear. He was already a fearful person. Though it would seem that Kylo Ren was justified in being fearful, as Luke tried to kill him in his sleep. Nice one, Luke, you ruined it for everyone. and these two perspectives of the same moment split them both into two extremes of their own views. Luke rebelling and shutting himself off from the religion that he knew, and Kylo Ren rebelling and going to the most extreme opposing faction of his religion. But back to Rey and Luke, it actually takes both of them living through an experience to actually arrive at a similar place in the end. And this I particularly liked about the movie, because even though they tried to reason with each other, we tend not to adhere to reason very well when we're emotionally invested in something, especially if the context for which someone is interpreting something from is based around fear. So the fact that this movie had them try to talk it out and actually not come to a conclusion because they both had such polarizing views and had their own personal investments in it. So with regards to Rey, she's partly trying to fill a void that her parents left because she wanted there to be meaning involved in their leaving. And with regards to Luke, it's about basically everything we've seen in the movies thus far, and specifically what he nearly did to Kylo Ren and what that instigated. So they all have their personal baggage, which has nothing to do with how their religion functions or works, but it's how they're coupling those personal things with their interpretations of their faith and their religion. The fact that this movie took that time to try and show the difference and show the journey that they went through to arrive at where they arrived, I thought that was actually pretty good, especially for a family space adventure movie. So about that journey of experience both Luke and Rey take. During a brief chat with Yoda, just before he biblically calls down lightning and sets a tree on fire, Yoda says probably the most important thing ever regarding organized religion. He effectively says the words don't matter. In the case of Star Wars, the very fact that different generations of Jedi have interpreted their religion in varying ways throughout the Jedi history, doing good, falling to the bad to the point where they join a cult called the Sith, and according to Luke, allowing pride to ultimately end them. Essentially, they interpreted what was convenient for them for their context at the time, regardless of the words that were in their books or what they were taught. Because at the end of the day, like everyone else, they were still just people. I think after Luke speaks to Yoda, what he then realizes about the Jedi religion is that it's not about those words, it's not about the books, it's about how the religion can provide a platform for people of similar ideals to focus on a symbol that represents their views, even if their ideals are not exactly the same. And in the case of Star Wars, that focus happens to be hope, and each person's journey to finding ways to keeping hope alive. But if you think about the Sith and the First Order, their ideology seems to be based around hate. But with regards to their focus on hope, I mean, Luke's final act is to mysteriously appear for all to see, perform a spectacular supernatural feat, all to close a chapter on the old ways of practicing the faith that he knew. But at the same time, he's also reigniting that same religion, particularly with the theme of hope and self-sacrifice. He basically becomes Space Jesus. As for Rey, when she went into the cave and saw the reflections of herself, I'm pretty sure that afterwards when she's speaking to Luke, she specifically said it didn't go on forever. She knew that there was an end to it somewhere. I'm pretty sure, I'd have to watch that bit again. But what I think that represents is the start of her new chapter and how the Jedi religion and people's interpretation of the Force will change going forward. Luke was the end of the chapter and she's the start of the next chapter. And I think it was important that she said that it didn't go on forever. Again, at some point, it will change again. I think that's further emphasised by the fact that she turned down the seat of power. She then goes to the salt desert planet, parts giant rocks instead of the sea, and then lead the survivors out into the salt desert. Probably to a spaceship somewhere, but the point is she leads them out to a desert. And again, I think that this evolution of their religion, or this next step, however you want to put it, is also echoed with the rebels. So for example, even as things get worse and worse for the rebels, even to the point where they send out a message to anyone in the galaxy and no one responds, they turn to it even more because they're becoming more and more powerless. They even performed one of the sickest space maneuvers I've ever seen in a movie just to buy time to try and get people to somewhere so they can hope they can survive a little bit longer. Also, it looked awesome. I mean, I rate that underneath Captain Adama FTLing the Battlestar Galactica into the atmosphere. That's my number one. Now there's this, and then it's the Picard maneuver. Honestly, this and the Picard maneuver are kind of on par, but this had better special effects. Anyway, because the rebels had to go through all this loss, they're having parts of their identity stripped away, including when they reached out to others and they got no response. All they have left is the last stand and their belief in the Force. So even when it seems to be failing them, even when you could argue that the Force is against them, they still believed in it even more than before. Because the point isn't whether it's real or not, the point is if it's helping them or not. Whether they're important enough for it to influence something in their favour. Now, I was told that the holy books from the tree were actually on the Millennium Falcon at the end. Now, I actually missed that, so I didn't see that myself. But if that's true, I think that suggests that she might end up using them as a guide or as a foundation, basically beginning the whole cycle of belief all over again. Possibly with some differences in an attempt to combat some of the issues that came before, but who knows? Maybe they will go that way, I don't know. But I like that it's kind of left open that way. Anyway guys, that's my thought on how I felt Star Wars The Last Jedi treated religion. Overall, I think they did a pretty good job. I felt like there was an underlying message with the various religious themes they portrayed in the movie, which is basically religion and ideologies evolve, and we get to try and influence how that can change. As culture evolves, so does the priorities of social constructs such as religion, ideologies, etc. Because it's not the words that are making people behave a certain way, it's people interpreting those words to use them for whatever it is they need to. And in this case, at the end, Luke put forward self-sacrifice and hope, and Rey seems to want to be taking that message forward, and we'll see what they actually do with it then. Anyway guys, thanks for taking the time to check out this video. I hope you found it at least interesting. If you're not into sociology, you probably found it incredibly boring, but either way, I like the subject, so that's why I wanted to talk about it. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll catch you guys next time.